Hello and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Somi Sorang and joining me here in the studio is our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program.
Good to be back, thanks.
A few weeks ago, on December 19th, South Korea's Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport announced its plan to construct 4 planned cities near the Seoul capital area in a bid to cool down the country's overheating property market.
지난 9월 21일 3만 5천 호 공급 계획에 이어 지방자치단체와 충분한 협의를 거쳐 오늘 2차 공급 계획으로 41곳에 15만 5천 호의 입지를 확장했습니다.
Now, the focal point of the government's latest home construction plan is on the 4 planned cities as part of Phase 3 of the long-running new city projects. South Korea has long relied on these planned city projects to alleviate the chronic supply crunch in Seoul's housing market. So on this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we take a closer look at the Moon Jae-in government's latest urban development plan and discuss the various pros and cons of planned city projects, as well as ways to transform these areas into fully autonomous, self-sustaining urban enclaves. Do you think these new planned cities will be effective in terms of alleviating the overheated housing market here in South Korea?
Short answer, no. I think that there are a whole bunch of forces at play when it comes to the real estate market. It's a largely speculative market, so it's frustrating for new home buyers to see that the cost of an apartment isn't really related to the cost of production. It's related to the, speculative value of the land on which that apartment is built. I recently bought an apartment. I was on a list. I had to win a lottery to get the apartment. That indicated the incredible demand there is. The other thing is, in terms of transportation and stuff, they are a little bit closer, and I would like to see people change their lifestyles in terms of commuting to work. I don't think it's as necessary to commute to work anymore, certainly not on a daily basis that we see generally take place in sort of medium-sized and corporate enterprises. So it would be good if we made some other changes to how we're living, as well as, developing alternative infrastructure that makes our cities more livable.
Are you a bit more optimistic in terms of the effects of these planned cities in terms of alleviating the overheating
I think
market?
Frank raised a very good point when he mentioned the speculation, and that is indeed a problem. I mean, I wish I could buy myself an apartment in Seoul, and I cannot because it's way too expensive. So some people who cannot afford an apartment in Seoul, maybe they can turn to these planned cities planned by the government. One of the problem is the government said, it will be 13 minutes away from Seoul.
서울 도심권에 30분 내 접근이 가능한 도시입니다. 택지 4곳은 서울과 1기 신도시 사이로 서울과 연접하거나 매우 가까운 곳에 유치하고 있으며
But actually, maybe it's 13 meters away if you drive at 3 a.m. or if you have an helicopter. But when you drive during rushing hours, the commute time, it might take 1 hour, 1 hour and a half. These are quite far cities. I mean, it's maybe a solution, but it's definitely not the only solution. Other measures are definitely necessary, I think.
Okay, so it's not the first choice solution.
I do think so, yes.
Could there be some pros to these planned cities?
Sure, I think definitely there can be some pros. I mean, if you look in South Korea, people used to live in the traditional hanok houses many, many years ago. Some people still do. But the strange thing was, I grew up in a house, and I used to consider moving into an apartment kind of like a step down. It wasn't something I wanted to do.
Right.
But in South Korea, moving out of an old hanok into an apartment was a desirable move that everybody kind of wanted. I think that might be be a good thing in a way, people having greater convenience. You know, when the new apartments that are being built in South Korea in smart cities and planned communities are really well organized from an architectural perspective. The apartment is going to have all of the modern conveniences that you're going to want. You know, so I think that there can be benefits.
I do think there is some example in Korea. It's quite successful, the planned cities in Korea. If you look at Pangyo, Pangyo is a place where, indeed, like R&D companies went there. If your job is in Bangyo and you live there, you can go to work. I mean, I like bicycles, so I notice that when I visit Bangyo, there is a lot of bicycles. Yes. People can commute by bicycle. I think it's great. There is a lot of green spaces. I think if you work for a company like Naver or all these software company and you live in Pangyo, you can put your kids in a good school too. I think that's a perfectly textbook example of a successful planned city.
Okay. Now, with the Phase 3 announcement of South Korea's new city project, the government has outlined 4 key development goals, and a good transportation system and city infrastructure have been identified by the South Korean media as key components to ensure success of the planned city project. What key attributes must these cities have in order to become self-sustaining, successful cities on their own right?
I think what you need to make it work, you need infrastructure. So you need schools, kindergarten, good university, hospital, culture center. Not only commercial center, of course, but they will come. I mean, I have a trouble with when they always start with a commercial center. They should come after. You should start with thinking of schools, hospitals. A good environment, green environment, mountains, forests. You should think, and I think it's time now to stop thinking about cars and stop building these huge avenues. I mean, the ideal place, a living place, is a place when you can go to work by bicycle. That's the place, and then because this is good for the environment, it's good for health, it's good for, it's great to go to work by bicycle. Maybe it's time to completely rethink the way we build our planned cities to think about the future, like what kind of environment we want to live in.
I think diversity is a very important issue to plan the city.
Okay.
Because in Japan, so in 90s and 60s, so economy grew so rapidly. So salaried men have a dream of having their own homes in the suburb of Tokyo.
Right.
But their children like living in the center area in Tokyo. So aging couples are left behind in planned cities.
Right.
So no young people have no interest in small planned cities now. So I think planned cities should provide rooms to not only big families, but also to small families, also to singles. So diversity is a very important source.
Diversity in the demographics of the
that's
residents.
Right, yes.
Okay. Now let's talk more about the cons of this planned city and some of the arguments against it. For example, residents living in planned cities built during Phase 2 of the project have voiced their discontent over the government's latest announcement. They say that the transportation and education infrastructure in their cities still aren't sufficient and that urban developments remain incomplete overall. Do you think it's premature to begin construction of Phase 3 planned cities when infrastructure in Phase 2 are still incomplete?
Yeah, I think so. For example, Tsukuba city, it is based off university. Tsukuba University is one of the top universities in Japan. Also in Tsukuba, governmental offices and R&D of big companies. So Tsukuba was called isolated area.
Okay,
but now it is connected with railroad. So you can go to Tsukuba from Tokyo. It takes only 40 or 50 minutes. So it is a successful case, but most of them are now suffering from less populated because of aging society.
Aging society and also urban decay.
Yeah.
So what can the South Korean government do to prevent some of the urban decay that we saw in planned cities in Japan?
So it's a difficult question because they are much more smarter than I. I'd like to ask them to learn what had happened in Japan. So by constructing so many planned cities. So this is my advice to
Okay.
them.
So learn from the model of
Right.
Japan, the
Yes.
mistakes, and also the benefits
that's
of
right.
the planned city. Okay. Okay, let's now talk about the location of these satellite cities. They lie in the immediate outskirts of Seoul, less than 2 kilometers away from the city limits. This is a notable departure from those built during phase 2 of the government's new city project, which were located roughly 10 kilometers away from the capital. So do you think these new planned cities could take on some of the administrative functions of Seoul?
I think out of 4 planned cities, Gwacheong area is very suitable because it is just south of Gwangnam area. So it is important to how much you can absorb the demand in Gwangnam area in order to curb the speculation, speculative investment.
Right.
So, but considering other 3 areas, I don't know.
Okay. Are you worried that it will lead to greater centralization?
I think centralization is not always bad. It is my idea because Tokyo is more populated and Tokyo is more centralized. But one scholar said that it is good to entire Japan in terms of productivity because we are living in the industry 4.0.
Right.
So in order to encourage knowledge intensity industry, so to some extent, the city should be, populated. So Tokyo center area is populated, but suburb is less populated.
So the scholar is saying that the entire city can act as some sort of an industry cluster because it will
that's
allow
right.
for
That's
better
right.
cooperation. Do you share some of that concern regarding centralization?
I mean, I'm not sure if it's working that well. With so many public workers moving to Sejong City but leaving their family behind in Seoul, which actually that means you need double number of apartments.
Yes.
You need an apartment for where you work and an apartment for where your family lives. Because sometimes their wife has a job in Seoul, because their kids...
Education.
Because of education, and that's really important. So Sejong City, so far, it's not such a, I would say it's not such a big success. I've heard report that on weekends it's a bit empty and public workers complaining like the only people they meet in the city are their co-workers.
Right.
But I think it was a good idea. I think the idea of developing the interland is probably the good one, but it has, I mean, it's extremely difficult. That shows the difficulty of urban policy and urban planning, because people, they respond to their own incentive.
Right.
And you cannot, I mean, the problem with Sejong City is like many families are broken now. You have mothers don't see their kids during the week.
weekend families.
And that's terrible. This is not the life, I wouldn't want this life.
Okay. But do you think it's better than having no home within Seoul?
Well, I think I kind of, I don't know if I agree or disagree with Fred. In terms of the government administration, I can understand why nationally they would want to have it in the capital city, Seoul. It's difficult as a journalist to have to travel all the way down
Back and
there
forth.
to go to some news conference or something.
Right.
They're not getting as much news coverage, and that means the public isn't as informed as they would be if Sejong administrative functions took place in the capital city. My preference would be that other private industries were encouraged to develop places like Sejong and develop other small communities in South Korea so that they would be more attractive to young families and young people to live in, which isn't the case right now.
But you saw that a little bit, for example, when KakaoTalk decided to move to Jeju. I thought that was a smart move. I mean, when you're a knowledge industry, it's better to choose a place that is comfortable to live. And in Jeju, there is as well now some international schools, and I think good schools. But this is not something the government can decide instead of companies. I mean, I think that as a government, you don't have much power on the decision taken by the companies.
I totally agree with you, but they can do some sort of things along the incentives line, just like they have with these planned cities. Obviously, the government is supporting this probably in a number of ways, and I think that they can support that on other levels as well in terms of economic and business and industrial development.
So in Japan, many times expectations are betrayed. For example, in back in 70s, Tanaka administration proposed the idea of redesigning entire Japan. So it is in order to disperse population to the local area. His idea is Tokyo and local areas should be connected with bullet train, so-called Shinkansen, and highways.
Right.
But as a result of it, so many investors made a lot of investment in local areas. So property market was getting higher and higher. So I think this method and this measure is very limited. Effectiveness is very limited.
Okay, so overall, not too optimistic
Yeah.
on this proposal. Now, South Korea's urban enclaves built during phase 1 of the planned city project are also facing the threat of urban decline, with South Korea's population being forecast to fall in the coming decades. These phase 1 planned cities are beginning to show signs of wear and tear, having been more than 30 years since they were first constructed. The old water pipes running throughout the city have been especially worrisome after one of them burst in an accident last month, killing one person and injuring several pedestrians. Do you think Moon Jae-in's planned city project should still move ahead as planned, or should he take a step back and have a look at maintenance and repair of phase 1 planned cities?
Well, I don't think it's just maintenance and repair of phase 1 of planned cities. I think that's a tendency that I kind of see in Korea across the board in terms of building infrastructure. South Korea has a relatively stagnant population, but then when we go back to, let's say, the Korean War, in 1953, there were no buildings on the Korean Peninsula taller than 3 stories. This created a chronic shortage of housing that South Korea is going to feel, I believe, for decades to come while it catches up. A whole bunch of apartments were built right after the war, kind of in a hurry in the next, say, 2 decades following the war into the 1970s. Those apartments are now older, they're not as attractive, so they need to be rebuilt. And if you look at for example, the electrical infrastructure in my neighborhood, I live in a neighborhood with a bunch of villas, and when you look up, you just see a bunch of cables going all over the place. So I would say definitely that they need to do more in terms of renovating and maintaining the existing planned cities that there are in South Korea. But I don't think that should hold up the development of new planned cities, if that's what the government thinks is the best path forward. There's no reason why they can't do both at the same time.
Right. Okay, now let's talk about the purpose of these planned cities. Thus far, South Korea has announced the construction of planned city projects in 3 phases over the course of many years to curb rising home prices and provide a better living environment for the country's citizens. And although the majority of South Korea's planned cities have been constructed with the aim of supplying more homes, others were built to create R&D and industrial clusters. So Kabe, could you tell us about the existing planned cities in Japan and whether they did achieve the purpose that they were built for?
Japan society is already aging society.
Right.
So there will be ghost town. This is a very social issue in Japan. There is one joke. So elderly people who are living in big apartment, so easy to die because nobody can help them.
Right.
Yeah. So many places to clean up. Right.
Right.
So they need pay more for utility. So I think suburb should be compact. So the center city should be manageable, controllable, but suburbs should be compact in terms of many shops and movie theaters in the walking distance. So I think this is a trend in Japan.
Okay. Could you tell us more about existing planned cities in Canada and the purposes that they were built for?
Google's parent company started a smart city in suburban Toronto. They made a deal with the Toronto regional government. They're getting a lot of sort of flack for making this deal with Google, but it was a project that was open to tender. The main sort of benefits that they suggest is that it will be more energy efficient and more livable. There'll also be, they mentioned a 14% reduction in the cost of living in terms of your domicile infrastructure. So there are some benefits that they see along those lines. Also in terms of the technology, things like automatic sorting of your garbage. Access to services can be managed better through the so-called Internet of Things. The downside is that they worry about the sharing of private information with the big company, especially Google. So there are concerns about how smart cities will make arrangements with big corporations that will use this data inappropriately.
Yeah, I think if I can add something, I'm personally very worried by this danger. I mean, smart cities, in theory, can be good things, but we really have to wonder, do we want to have sensors accumulating all this data about us? Like, are the benefits worth the risk? And when you look at China now, what's happening and how the amazing tools that China is developing to control its citizens, to control the daily life of the citizens, to know exactly where all their citizens are at any moment with this facial recognition softwares, and these camera CCTVs are absolutely everywhere. And when you think of, what would become if someday we have more authoritarian government, democracy, or even not that, even companies, like what are they doing to do with all this data? Like, we are really, really losing our private life. I don't think the benefits are worth it. So the whole, this new paradigm of smart cities, I really hope these politicians and decision makers think deeply about what they really want. Like, being a smart city doesn't mean you need sensor and camera everywhere. A smart city is a city where, as a citizen, you have more power and decision power about what can be done, and you just decide what is good for you, and not big corporations decide for you what is good for you.
Okay. Now, coming back to France, are there existing planned cities in France that you can talk about, and what purposes they were built for initially?
So yeah, we do have planned cities, especially around Paris, because after the war there was a huge shortage of housing, and Paris was somehow to counterbalance the overdevelopment of Paris, the government decided to build around in the suburbs some cities. And you have some example like Cergy-Pontoise is considered a success.
Right.
It was a success because they moved, as I mentioned before, schools, hospitals, cultural centers, movie theaters, and there was as well some green environment. I mean, but there is still some problem. Like, for example, I've never been to Cergy-Pontoise, so it's not a place where you visit it unless you live there.
I see some skepticism. You say it's considered a success, but I get a sense that you're not 100% in agreement with that.
Because some suburbs now are considered as failures, like what we call the banlieue, are. No, I mean, compared to what the intention and what you see the result today, it is a failure. And mild success in the sense that, I mean, I think people living in Cergy-Pontoise are pretty happy there. But I was reading, to prepare this show, I was reading some recent news. And Cergy-Pontoise, they want to completely redevelop it because it was planned in the 60s. And the idea of the ideal city in the 60s is completely different from now. So basically, they are stuck with a plan of the city where you have a huge avenue, a lot of parking lots, a huge commercial center in the middle where people don't go anymore, so there is no shop. So basically, you have to tear that down completely and completely rebuild the cities. So that's a problem when you don't have an organic development. If it's too planned, you might be stuck with a plan that is completely not related. You might be stuck with a city plan that is not related to your needs, the current needs and the current society.
Right. Or as we say in the news business, it's time-bound. The story's old if in 2 days later it's too old a news story. Same with the city. 2 decades later it's not meeting the contemporary needs of people.
Okay.
Exactly.
Now this is the final question. What are some key points that the Moon Jae-in government should keep in mind as it goes forward with its planned city project?
So I think a planned city are new towns, right? So new towns will be older towns in 15 or 20 years. So please think about what will happen in 20 or 15 years.
Have a longer-sighted approach.
That's right.
Okay, and Frank?
Well, my feeling would be don't just look at trying to tamp down a real estate market. Look at the other things that a smart city or a planned community should be doing, and be patient.
Okay. All right, we'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you for your insight. Thank you
Thank
very
you. Good to
much.
be here.
you.
Thanks.
Now, phase 3 of South Korea's planned city project is the latest of the Moon Jae-in government's efforts to stabilize the housing market. It's hoped the government will take a long-sighted approach and consider the next generation and the generation after that as it carries out its housing market stabilization measures. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.